My name's John. I'm one of the pastors here at Stillwater, and I'm so thankful to be able to worship Jesus here with you today. We're continuing our message series that's called Mythbusters. And in this series, we're looking at things that people would believe to be true that may or may not be true. We're kind of going to look at some of those and just explore those together. We're in our second week of this. You know, I was reading a study this past week by a group called Barna. They do a lot of studies and surveys, and they were studying Americans to see which verse in the Bible was the most familiar verse among Americans. And so they did that survey, and they asked folks, which Bible verse do you know best? What was the most common response? Any guesses?
John 3:16.
John 3:16, very close. That was number 2. You know what number 1 response was?
Genesis 1:1.
Genesis 1:1, good guess. No. You don't even have to cite the reference. You can just say the words if you know them.
Jesus wept.
God helps those who help themselves. The number 1 best known verse in the Bible is not in the Bible. That's kind of a bummer when you think about it, right? God helps those who help themselves. That's the myth that we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be exploring this. Where did it come from? Well, Ben Franklin is very commonly cited as having, we know Ben Franklin said it, he popularized it, but it actually goes back even farther than that great American ideal. It goes all the way back to Aesop's fables. We know it was at least as early as that. So it's an old saying, just not one that comes directly from the Bible. Now, it's certainly a statement that there is a lot of biblical support around the concept. We can find verses that might say similar types of things. For example, Proverbs 6:6. Take a lesson from the ants, you lazy bones. Solomon likes to sing people too, right? He's wise and a wise guy as well, I guess. Learn from their ways and become wise. Though they have no prince or governor or ruler to make them work, they labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter. Okay, so clearly God values hard work. I mean, God in the creation story, God demonstrates that God himself works. Okay, so clearly God values this. God values effort. Effort is a very important aspect of being a follower of Jesus. No question about that. But you know, later in the same book, Solomon makes an interesting statement. He says, those who trust in themselves are fools. Okay, so when we look at this statement, God helps those who help themselves, we'd see a proverb that kind of supports it, but also kind of one that kind of challenges it as well. How do we put all this together? Well, maybe you've heard the story about the guy who his town rapidly flooded. The river was rising, and he found himself in just a terrible situation. Water was coming up around his house. He couldn't get out. He gets up onto his roof, and he prays to God. He says, God, please save me. I put my trust in you and you alone. Then an old man comes by in a rowboat. Says, hey, get in. I'll row you to safety. And the man on the roof says, thank you, but no thank you. I'm putting my trust in God and God alone. And so he continues to pray, and the water gets up about the height of his gutters, and the police come by in a motorboat, and he says, thank you, but I'm putting my trust in God and God alone. The water gets up almost to the top of the roof, right? Just a couple feet below his feet. And the Coast Guard comes by in a helicopter, drops down the ladder to him, and he says, thank you, but I'm putting my trust in God and God alone. The waters continue to rise, and the man drowns. He gets to heaven, and he says to Jesus, hey, what's the deal? I put my trust in you. Why didn't you answer my prayers? And Jesus says, I sent a rowboat, a motorboat, and a helicopter. What more do you want? It takes effort, right? It takes a little bit of effort. Effort is not something that our faith is opposed to. But you know, we laugh at this because it's ridiculous, but clearly God expects us to do things. But this is one of those tensions in the Bible. We know God expects us to do things, so it's not an either or. It's really kind of a both-and situation. We're called to do things, but those things that we do are not for the purpose of saving us from our sins, okay? That's not something that we can do on our own. That's God's work. And so we oftentimes want to feel that we and God are like, say, equal partners in this, right? Like it's like a 401k matching program, right? Like God puts in his 3%, you put in your 3%, someday you can stop working, right? And it's not really like that. That's not what faith is all about. Why are we so attached to this belief that God helps those who help themselves? Well, pride is a good reason. Because we struggle with the idea that we are dependent upon God. That's tough for us. We want to be in control, but yet the core of the Christian faith is that we're not in control. That Jesus is Lord. That's our core statement, right? And that statement alone, Jesus is Lord, means I am not Lord. There's only one Lord in your life. It may be Jesus, it may be you, but it's not both, right? You know that classic statement, if God is your co-pilot, it's time to switch seats, right? That's not what we're called to in this life. So yes, we have personal responsibility, absolutely. We have a responsibility to follow the ways of Jesus Christ, our Lord. But this is tough because we want to control everything using our own power. And it's hard for us to let go of that control. Stories told about a man who was hiking and he tragically slipped off the edge of a cliff. And right as he's falling down, he grabs a hold of this tree that's sticking out from the side of the cliff. He looks down and the ground is literally hundreds of feet below and it's jagged rocks. If he falls, it's certain death. He looks up, and there's the edge of the cliff, just out of reach. He can't get to it. So he's hanging here, and he calls out, and he says, "Is anybody up there? Please, help me." There's a pause, and then a deep voice says, "This is God. I'm here to help. Trust me and let go of the tree." He looks down. He looks back up, and he says, "Is there anybody else up there?" Because letting go is awful tough, isn't it? Letting go of control is so tough. It requires this faith in God, this trust that says, I can't do everything on my own. I need God. I need God's help. I need Jesus to save me. I can't save myself. Pride gets in the way sometimes. You know, as we look deeper at this mentality that says God helps those who help themselves, it's a mentality that we buy into more easily when things are going well, right? Because when things are going well, God helps those who help themselves. Yeah, look at me, right? Because things are going pretty well for me right now. And so clearly, God has helped me because I've really done a lot on my own here, right? And so our pride can seep into this. And it's a slow and it's a subtle kind of thing, but it's so easy for that pride to sneak in. If you're down on your luck, well, you probably haven't worked as hard as I have, right? That's kind of what this mentality says. And again, there's a grain of truth in all of this. There's some truth in all of us. 2 Thessalonians 3:10, Paul says, "Those unwilling to work will not get to eat." That was commonly quoted in my house growing up. I don't know about you. It's very true. It later says, "Settle down and work hard to earn your own living." Again, God values hard work. He values responsibility. That doesn't just mean that we have no responsibility or that our actions mean nothing. We talk about letting go. Let's say that you're struggling with finances. To let go and give God control does not mean that you say, forget the budget, we'll just see what happens and let God fix it. No, that's not how it works. It requires some discipline, right? We understand that. It says in Proverbs 12:11, "Those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies will have no sense." So, you know, if we just kind of spend our days daydreaming, not working, it's not going to work out well for us. So how do we deal with this tension between there's some truth to it, but yet if you take it to its fullest extreme, it's problematic? Well, you might want to write this down. I believe God is not opposed to effort, but God is opposed to earning. okay? I want to make that distinction. God is not opposed to effort. In fact, God calls us to put forth effort, but God is opposed to earning. Let me explain the story that Jesus told. The disciples, they had left so much to follow Jesus. When you think about Peter, he was a fisherman, probably a successful one, and he left his boat, he left his nets, he left the way that he earned income, he followed Jesus, he probably saw his family a lot less. There were many sacrifices that Peter made, and the other disciples as well. And so one time, Peter was probably thinking about these things, thinking of all he had left behind, and he says to Jesus, in Matthew 19:27, we've given up everything to follow you. What will we get? Fair question, right? I mean, it's easy to look at him and scoff and say, oh, Peter, you should know better. But if you were in that position, if you had left everything to follow Jesus, and you're not sure what's going to happen here, how all this is going to pay off, it's a fair question. Jesus, what's the return on investment here for me? I've given you so much. What am I getting back? So Jesus, he answers them in a couple ways. One of them is with this story. Matthew 20, verse 1. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal daily wage and sent them out to work. Okay, this is how the labor economy worked in those days. Folks who owned land and needed workers would go to the marketplace early in the morning. They'd get there 6 or even earlier in the morning. And those who wanted a job would go to the marketplace early in the morning. And this is where you get connected, okay? You're not likely to become like a long-term employee here, but this is how you get your work for the day. They had set upon standard rates, just like we have minimum wage or standard rates in whatever your job is. And so the workers knew what they could expect to be paid. The employers knew what they would expect to pay. And this is how they got connected. This is how they get started with their work. Verse 3, at 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. So he hired them, telling them he would pay whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went to work in the vineyard. At noon and at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. Now, there's a subtle difference there. If you notice in the first group, the 6 a.m. group, he said, I'll pay you the normal daily wage, okay? Let's just say, for our purposes, let's say that's $200, okay? He says, you come to work for me, I'll pay you $200 a day, okay? And yet here, he gives a different statement. He's the 9 o'clock, the noon, the 3 o'clock, he says, I'll pay you whatever is right at the end of the day. So it stands to reason it would be kind of a prorated amount. You don't put in your full 12 hours, so that's how long they work. There were 12-hour days. If you don't put in your full 12 hours, you're not likely to get 12 hours worth of money. Fair enough, right? So he sends them out to work. Verse 6. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he was in town again, and he saw some people standing around. He asked them, why haven't you been working today? They replied, because no one hired us. Now think about it. These folks have been at the marketplace, presumably all day. Maybe they came late, I don't know. But they've been there while other employers have come by and have looked and have seen them and said, nope, rather not hire that one, and have gone on, right? So they're still standing here. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's almost quitting time, and nobody's hired them. So what we can guess is that these are not the best workers out there, right? Okay, who you've got here is you've got the guy who spits in your onion rings at Burger King, right? And his friend, the one who shoots selfies of herself at work all day long, right? That's who we've got left at this time of day. It's 5 o'clock, it's almost quitting time, and yet this guy, for whatever reason, he invites them to come and to work. The landowner told them, then go out and join the others in my vineyard. This time, he doesn't even say anything about compensation. I mean, it's 5 o'clock after all, right? So who knows what's going to happen here. But for them, they're kind of the low end of employees, I'm guessing, and they're certainly giving low end amounts of time, so there's not a lot of risk. So he brings in this crew at different times and perhaps at different skill levels throughout the day. Verse 8. That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and pay them, beginning with the last workers first. Okay, so we start off with onion ring guy and selfie girl, right? We're going to pay them first. When those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage? Are you kidding me? You just paid them $200 to come here. They didn't do diddly squat. They were only here for an hour anyways, and you paid them $200. This is crazy, right? I mean, this is just stupid. I mean, any farmer that does that, he's going to be broke pretty soon. I mean, you can't afford to pay labor like that. That just seems like a dumb decision, right? So they get paid this full day's amount. And yet, verse 10, when those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed, logically, they would receive more. But they too were paid a day's wage. Ouch! I mean, this farmer just keeps getting dumber and dumber and dumber, right? I mean, we're hiring people throughout the day, probably varying capacities, certainly varying amounts of time. He overpays the ones who only work for an hour, and then he takes the guys who've been working hard for him all day long, and he pays them the exact same amount of money. Not only that, he intentionally does this in front of others so they can all see this. He's overpaying. He's demotivating his workforce. I mean, what's going to happen tomorrow when the same farmer shows up at 6 a.m. to hire people? I mean, if you're one of the 6 a.m. guys, you're like, you know what? I'm good. Catch me at 5 today. I'll be here, right? I want that plan. I want the $200 an hour plan, not the $200 for 12 hours plan. That was tough. I mean, this guy doesn't get it. I mean, I don't know. He must have got like his business degree from the University of Michigan or something, right? I mean, it's been a rough week for us Ohio State folks, right? We need some encouragement. But regardless, this guy, it makes no sense. It just seems stupid. It seems so ridiculous. They protest, and we all know why, because I would have made that same protest. Verse 13, he answered one of them, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for me for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I am kind to others? So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last." At first glance, this parable kind of makes me mad. I mean, there's so many parables, you get kind of that warm fuzzy, right? You know, this one you're like, this just seems dumb. It just, I mean, why would he do this? This contrast. I mean, yes, he's right. It's his money. He can pay whatever he wants to pay. He paid the 6 a.m. guys a fair rate, what he promised to pay them, okay? He didn't steal from anybody, he didn't rip anybody off. But the contrast doesn't make any sense in our normal logical terms. And this is exactly how grace works. Grace is such an unbelievably generous, unearned thing that when we put it in terms of earnings, it makes no sense. It really doesn't. I mean, it is such an unbelievably generous thing that paying the end of the day guy $200 is just a microcosm of how incredibly, stupidly generous God's grace is. I mean, he just gives grace. He extends grace to all of humanity. And we don't earn it. He gives it to us for free. It's the most generous, big, obnoxious, crazy gift that's ever given. And Jesus tells us this story because he wants us to understand that yes, effort is absolutely important, but it's not, you don't receive grace because you earned it. Amen. You can't. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you work, you cannot earn God's grace. God helps those who help themselves. There's that arrogance that we see there in there that forgets the fact that the only reason that I can know God is because of grace. I was lost just like you, dead in my trespasses and sins. I couldn't have even reached out to find God. That's how lost we were. We're not here because we're a little better than average, because we work harder than somebody else, because we're a little smarter than the average person, whatever it is. No, we're here because of grace.
Amen.
And that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. So when we believe this half-truth, this myth, if you will, that God helps those who help themselves, it's easy for us to look down on others. You can't earn this. It's just not possible. God's grace is bigger than you could ever earn. And sometimes, maybe we struggle a little bit with this, if we're honest. Because, well, none of us would say, oh, we want other people to go to hell or whatever. We struggle with maybe this generosity of God's grace because we want to feel like somehow we've had some earning in this whole process. I mean, I don't know about you. For me, I'm a lifelong follower of Jesus. I've read the Bible cover to cover a whole bunch of times. When God called me to go to be a pastor, I went to school. I spent thousands and thousands of hours of my life, hundreds of thousands of dollars on education, all sorts of things. I tithe throughout my life. I pray every day. I try to be good and kind and whatever, even if people aren't to me, and I don't always succeed at that. I mean, many of you would say the exact same things and many others that I couldn't say. I mean, there are plenty of folks here with pretty good spiritual resumes, if you will. And it's so easy for us to fall into the myth that everything we have is really something we have because we've worked for it, because we've earned it, because we're better somehow than others, because when others are slacking, we're doing that. God helps those who help themselves. Yeah, just look at me. It's a myth. It's a myth that it's a subtle one, but it's one that Satan uses to make us more arrogant and to forget how good God's grace is.
Amen.
I mean, think about it. Who gave me these hands to work? Who gave me a mind to study? The money that I tithe, who gave me that? Everything that I have is a gift from God. It's exactly what the Bible says. James 1:17, whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God the Father. Whatever good and perfect things are in your life, they are a gift of God. That puts it all in a whole new context. Just like every other person on this planet, I have no hope of salvation without the grace of God, which is by definition free. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 says it this way: God saved you by his grace when you believed. You can't take credit for this.
Amen.
It's a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done, so that none of us can boast about it.
That's right.
Be careful with God helps those who help themselves. For we are God's masterpiece. God has created us anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do all the good things he planned for us a long ago. So yes, those good things matter. Yes, your efforts, your faithfulness, your decisions, your sacrifices, yes, they absolutely matter to God. But they're not earnings. They're not things that you do to earn your salvation. No, they're things you do to say, God, thank you for that grace.
Amen.
The least I can do is to give myself to you, to say yes to your calling, to make sacrifices to build your kingdom, to give of my time and my talent, my resources, just like the rest of you do. The least I can do is that. Because even the whole collective of things I'm going to do for God throughout my life are tiny, teeny tiny, compared to the value of the grace that God has given me and that God has given me. Maybe a better phrase would be, God helps those who can't help themselves. Because that's where we all were. That's where we all start off in this process. That's where we begin. You know, I know, because I've been there, that today there are folks at our partner church in Cuba who have virtually nothing materially, and after church today they will clean the floor, they'll mop the floor with towels and water, basically. That's about all they have, is a towel on a stick kind of thing. And they'll do it not for money. Most of them aren't even paid. The ones who are, it's tiny amounts. They'll do it because they believe God called them to, and because they see how God is using that simple act of service to build His kingdom. Am I any better than them because my call is different? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. God doesn't look at me today any more favorably than He looks at them, because I showed up today to do what God's calling me to do, and they're showing up to do what God is calling them to do. And Jesus has this funny phrase: so those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last. I believe that. I do. And you know, if I were God, looking at this like, who gets into the kingdom of heaven first lineup, maybe some days we should put them in front of me. Maybe some days their faithfulness is stronger than my faithfulness. I've met them. They're pretty faithful people, let me tell you. There's probably a lot of people that would belong in line ahead of me. I got a text this week from my friend Patrick, the pastor in India. He runs a children's orphanage there in a really tough area. And this week, the church right next to his ministry was burned down by people who hate Christians. And he texted and he asked me to pray. I asked you to pray for my friend Patrick and his ministry. If I'm doing the heavenly lineup, Patrick certainly gets in before Jon does. You know, there's probably a lot of people that would belong there. There's our friends in Cuba, Patrick. There's the aborted baby who never got to see the light of day. I bet that child gets in before me. There's the rich man who has so much and he's born into so much. It's so hard for him to see his need for anything. And yet somehow he finds Jesus late in life, despite all the obstacles. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. I bet he gets in first too. There's the guy on death row. The night before his execution, for all those murders he commits, he says yes to the exact same grace that I said yes to. Because he needs it exactly as much as I need it. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. Because for him, he only gets a few hours of knowing the grace and forgiveness and love of God. I get a lifetime. He never gets to sit with people like you, to learn from you, to be in community with you, to grow with you in faith. I do. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. God's math, it's often different than our math. And I'm glad that it is. Because if his math is based on earnings, I have nothing. My account is at zero every time. The only reason there's anything in my account or your account is because of grace. Thanks be to God. You know, maybe you haven't said yes to this grace today. Maybe you're still trying to earn it. Friends, let this be the day that you step off that performance treadmill and you say, Jesus, I'm going to put my trust in you. There's no way that I can right all the wrongs that I've done. There's no way that I can pay the price for my sins. I'm going to trust in your perfect sacrifice, the only sacrifice pay the price for me, that can help me be in your kingdom, God. And so from now on, my efforts, they're not directed towards earning anything. No, they're directed towards saying thanks. Maybe that's you. Would you pray with me this day? God, we give ourselves to you. We remember once again that it's not our earnings, it's your grace. Thank you, God, for this grace that is so great, grace that is greater than all my sin. Thank you, Jesus, that you gave your life for me, for us, when none of us deserved it. God, I pray for those who may be trying to earn this. May this be the day they say, Jesus, come into my life, heal me, forgive me of all my sin.